What must have been going through the minds of those hostages as though they were released today, and how must their loved ones have felt? Can you imagine? How long have they been? How many days is it?
Well, since October the 7th. So, watching the footage of the hostages inside their coach, whatever it was, being brought to that sort of checkpoint. Yeah. I mean, it reinforces it again, doesn't it? It almost brings, and doesn't bring it home because it's so difficult for any of us to imagine it.
We can't even put ourselves there.
But it makes you feel sick in the stomach, doesn't it? And so sad that children, little children being taken hostage by medieval savagery. It's just...
I know. Well, kidnapping children is a war crime as well, it should be. It's I mean, even just seeing the headphones and the teddy bears.
Is it not a war crime?
It is a war crime, as well as it should be. Yeah. But just to see even the cushions and the teddy bears and the headphones, it's heartbreaking. You cannot imagine what they've been through, what their families have been through. I mean, can you picture if it had been dozens of British children who had been taken hostage?
Annabel, we're going to end up in tears again. We need to be controlled tonight. I find it very difficult to talk about this. To talk about children in this situation, it is so appalling.
Yeah, and I see the emotion in your face, and what human being wouldn't have it? I say, as a father of a young child, that the devastation that we've witnessed on our TV screens in Gaza, where so many thousands of children, if the statistics are believed, have been killed. And I'm someone who implacably opposes Hamas and have called it a death cult repeatedly. But each of those Palestinian children's lives in Gaza are worth every bit as those Israeli lives and as the life of my son. And so when I see the suffering on both sides, it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. And it's, every child's life, those babies in the incubators, it's just... it is heart-wrenching, and the news has been it's been 48 days. The news has been so depressing on a daily basis to see Palestinian children dying as well. But, none of this, Matthew, and I say this every week, this would not have happened if Hamas terrorists, who are Palestinians, had not crossed the border and with their bare hands murdered, attacked and kidnapped 1,400
I'll just say in
people.
response to that, because I do think this is important. What we saw on October...
And sorry, Matthew, another point I'd just like to make is that many of those Palestinian babies and children and civilians did not need to die if Hamas just handed the hostages back. All they had to do was hand them over.
What I would say,
only now, because they are running out of medicines, they are running out of food, Hamas, that they decided to do this exchange.
Hang on. I think Israel would have gone after Hamas even if the hostages had not been taken. Let me say again, what we saw on October the 7th was savagery on a scale that I'm not sure I have read in a newspaper, in a British newspaper around the world during my lifetime. Let's be absolutely unequivocal about that. That does not mean that Israel, as a developed democracy, an ally of ours, doesn't have responsibility in international law and humanitarian law, because it absolutely does. And some of the language that we have heard coming out of the mouths of Israeli politicians and military is unacceptable. And I think, I can't prove it to you, but I do not think, and I think this strongly, that the scale of the carnage, the displacement of 1.7 million people, the deaths of so many thousands, again, if we believe those figures, and they aren't widely disputed, I don't think that carnage is justified.
And I think also that, sorry, Annabel, I'll come to you next. I'll give your time next. I also don't think that, you make the point that even if the hostages hadn't been taken, Israel would have been quite right, even if the hostages weren't taken, even if all they'd done is come over and murder those 1,400 people, they are quite right in their retaliation, exactly as we would be in this country. And you would probably hear some intemperate statements from politicians in the UK of whatever party, if a terrorist group arrived in England and did exactly the same thing to our citizens as they did to Israelis.
Murdered our children and raped women. And I think the problem is, of course, is that it's become so polarised here. Of course, everybody is on the side of civilians. Nobody wants to see civilian casualties. But there are a number of issues we're calling for a ceasefire, not least the fact that there was a ceasefire. And until the 7th of October, when Hamas, a terrorist organisation, launched that absolutely brutal attack. And if you're calling for a ceasefire, as a number of people do in Britain today, then ultimately you're undermining Israel's right to self-defence.
I haven't called, by the way, I haven't called for a ceasefire. What I have said is that Israel has to abide by international and humanitarian law. And we may have had extreme statements, as Nadine said, if this atrocity had been carried out in this country. It is our responsibility to call those statements out, whether they're Israeli or American or British or anywhere, because it is in our darkest hours that we have to hold on to our values most dearly.
And that is true. But we cannot prevent Israel from defending its territory.
Of course.
We should support them in doing that.
And we need to bear in mind that Hamas are using civilians as human shields. It's extremely difficult.
Can we also
conflict
understand
for
that
Israel, and the IDF is going to great lengths to protect civilian lives?
The IDF does go to some lengths. It gives an hour or two for people to
Matthew,
evacuate.
it goes to great lengths.
It gives an hour or two.
The eyes of the world watching what the IDF are doing on a daily basis.
And we are also watching
by drones, by air, by satellite. We watch them every day.
We are also watching the
and they are incredibly careful to make sure that the only targets that they hit are those where Hamas terrorists are hiding, who may use Palestinians, because Hamas used those 5,000 children as human shields. That's why.
OK, let me respond, because this is really important. This is a debate. The fact, as I've already said repeatedly again, that we are dealing here, and Israel is dealing with a death cult, right? A death cult that cannot be properly negotiated with, does not, and the fact that they do indeed use civilians as human shields and have done for some time, and that is evil, does not mean that Israel can be given...
I'm glad you admitted that.
Well, I haven't admitted, it's not the right word. It doesn't mean that Israel should be given carte blanche to cause whatever devastation and whatever death numbers that it chooses.
They're not. They're hitting Hamas targets.
1.7 million people are displaced,
I know,
Nadine.
Matthew, and that is absolutely shocking.
Well,
but there is not a
then?
move that the IDF don't make, which the eyes of the world are not watching.
One of their own ministers suggested that an atomic bomb should be on the cards. One of their ministers. We are dealing with a far-right government.
I'm sure there will be irrational and intemperate and emotional statements from their ministers who may have family or friends or somebody that they know who is being held hostage,
and should they not be held to account? Should they not be held to account?
Well, if their actions, if their words became actions, if their words
1.7 million people, you yourself say it's appalling.
You must know that not since the Spanish Civil War has there been a conflict without civilian displacement and civilian casualties.
Never.
That is a terrible reality of the world in which we live in.
The death toll in the last few weeks in a narrow strip, which is 4.5 miles or whatever it is wide at its narrowest point, it is a sitting duck. And we have seen 14,000 people die. Many of them will be terrorists. Thousands of them are children. And the question, we have to hold Israel to account.
It is not the fault of the IDF.
If they killed 2 million people, Nadine, if they killed 2 million people in Gaza, would you still say that's the fault of Hamas? Is there no sense of scale? Is there no sense of proportionality?
My argument doesn't change on the basis of the numbers.
So 2 million people is okay. So 2 million people is okay. Okay.
No, Matthew, I did not say that.
You said it doesn't change on the basis of the numbers, and I've given you a number, 2 million.
No, Matthew, it doesn't change on the basis of the number. The nub of the argument is this, that Hamas use Palestinians, Palestinian children, hospitals as human shields. That is the problem. Not the IDF, not Israel trying to take out Hamas, who are terrorists, evil terrorists. The problem is the fact that Hamas use Palestinian civilians as human shields.
So how many people? Let's use numbers. How many people?
I'm not putting an arbitrary number.
Well, I am. I'm saying 13,000 people, many of them children. 5,000 children is too much.
One child dead is too much. One child dead is too much.
Well, there have been 5,000 of them.
But one child is too much. But that child's life is the responsibility of Hamas, not of the IDF. It is the responsibility of Hamas. They are the terrorists. They started the war. They crossed the border. They murdered Israeli civilians.
Doesn't mean Israel can do whatever it likes, Nadine. It has to act within international law.
You're completely wrong. They don't do whatever they like. They have to abide by the law because everybody is watching what they do.
If they transgress international law, if they transgress humanitarian law, and I'm suggesting, I can't prove it to you here and now, but others might be able to.
But if they do that, it would have been proved by now.
It may well be.
It would have been proven by now.
Well, lots of people think they have.
Some people, I don't use this word.
I don't use this word, but there are people out there who've been talking about genocide and ethnic cleansing. I'm not using these words. I'm purely putting figures to you and saying that 13,000
You're just
people
throwing
is too
words
many.
into the air for dramatic effect.
I'm saying 5,000 children.
I can promise genocide means.
I haven't used the word. I'm saying there are plenty of people who think it is.
Not trying to ethnically cleanse.
1.7 million people have been displaced out of a population that is believed to be about 2.3 million.
But
1.7 million have lost everything.
Genocide.
I didn't say it was genocide. I'm saying that there are views out there that are extreme and that use those sorts of words, which I think are dangerous.
The civilians are dying above ground while Hamas hide like cowards in the tunnels.
I'm not defending Hamas. I've just said they're a death cult. I'm saying it doesn't mean that Israel should abrogate its responsibility. And the figures that have come out of Gaza and the scenes that we have seen, as you say, in broad daylight in the eyes of the world, I don't think are acceptable. And that is despite the fact, and partly I agree because of the fact that we are dealing with a death cult. And believe me, Nadine, a lot of people in this country feel that. And I am Jewish myself. And I can tell you that the rise in anti-Semitism in this country is despicable, and it sickens me to the pit of my stomach. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean that I don't hold Israel to account.
Can I just ask one very quick question and try and suck out some of the heat of this discussion, which is, I sympathise with your position. What is the alternative? How do you stop displacement? How do you stop civilian death without undermining Israel's right to self-defence?
I don't think that Israel could have done something, apart from doing nothing, that would have meant there would be no civilian casualties. I'm not naive. I'm not saying that there weren't inevitably going to be some civilian deaths. Israel in the past has been successful, relatively successful, at assassinating Hamas leaders. And I think one of the key things here about Israel, because it is a country under siege in so many ways, is to make sure that it retains the moral high ground, that it wins the international PR war, because if it doesn't, it makes its own future more insecure. And at the moment, it is losing a lot of friends. And as someone who cares about the state of Israel, as we all should, that is a massive concern.